The trap of toxic positivity and false peace. In the modern landscape of corporate boardrooms, institutional hierarchies, and mainstream spiritual movements, a quiet deception is continuously deployed to pacify the human soul. Clever oppressors and religious authority figures frequently sell a distorted version of truth, designed not to liberate, but to maintain and optimize the machinery of control. By co-opting high vibrational concepts and twisting them into tools of psychological compliance, the archontic world successfully pacifies divine sparks, preventing them from recognizing their sovereign identity as monads. The most pervasive and deceptive manifestation of this weaponized truth is the ideology of positive thinking. On its surface, remaining positive appears to be an empowering, high-frequency state of mind. However, inside the demiurgic grid, this concept has been hollowed out and replaced with toxic positivity, a systematic doctrine that commands individuals to ignore negativity and remain blind to the proliferation of evil. Corporations routinely hold workshops on optimism and emotional resilience, not to free their workforce, but to ensure employees absorb systemic exploitation without complaint. When a soul is conditioned to believe that observing or pointing out injustice is inherently negative or low frequency, the oppressors achieve absolute immunity. True awareness observes reality, identifies inversion, sovereign action. Demiurgic trap observes inversion, enforces positivity, proliferates evil. This structural hack relies heavily on the enforcement of false compromise. Within the spiritual mechanics of the archontic realm, any compromise that allows deception, abuse, or energetic parasitic behavior to continue unhindered is inherently demiurgic. Refusing to criticize structural wrongdoing or active deception under the guise of maintaining a clean vibe or not judging others is itself a profound form of darkness. It is an intellectual and spiritual abdication that hands the keys of reality directly to the oppressor. Nowhere is this trap more devastating than in personal relationships. When an awakened spirit is placed in an environment of engineered marriage coldness or emotional abuse, religious and social authorities often advise them to keep quiet, practice unconditional tolerance, and project positive thoughts to keep the peace. This advice is a psychological time bomb. Silence in the face of ongoing harm does not heal the void. It feeds the siphon. By suppressing valid spiritual outrage and forcing a smile over an open wound, the soul becomes an active accomplice in its own energetic containment. True spiritual functioning is not a soft, uncritical blind compliance, nor is it the refusal to acknowledge the shadow. Uncompromising clarity of the monad. To stand in authentic divine light is to possess the courage to see reality exactly as it is, unvarnished, unfiltered, and raw. A sovereign spirit recognizes that calling out evil, identifying systemic traps, and refusing false compromises are not acts of lower consciousness, but the essential fire of spiritual boundaries. By dismantling the illusion of toxic positivity and standing firm against false peace, you break the archontic script, reclaim your authority, and refuse to let the simulation dictate your reality. The geometry of weaponized forgiveness, Part 2. When the archontic system sees that an awakened monad has seen through the illusion of toxic positivity, it deploys its second-tier containment script, weaponized forgiveness and spiritual bypassing. Having failed to keep you blind to the presence of evil, the demiurgic structure now attempts to disarm your response to it. Clever oppressors, institutional authorities, and false spiritual teachers instruct you that true spiritual maturity means immediate, unconditioned forgiveness and the complete erasure of righteous indignation. They teach that holding boundaries or demanding accountability traps you in karma or low vibrational resentment. This instruction is a calculated distortion of spiritual mechanics. In the architecture of the Matrix, weaponized forgiveness operates as an automated reset button for the oppressor. It forces the victim to continually absorb energetic damage while erasing the consequence for the perpetrator. When you are taught to forgive systematic deceit, domestic coldness, or corporate exploitation without any fundamental correction of the behavior, you are being coerced into granting a perpetual license for your own spiritual drainage. The Matrix thrives on this endless cycle because it keeps the awakened monad perpetually recovering from wounds rather than wielding true divine authority. False forgiveness. Injustice occurs. Enforced absolution. Cycle repeats. Sovereign mandate. Injustice occurs. Increased sharp discernment. Increased severance. To break this trap, The monad must understand the fundamental difference between spiritual release and demiurgic compliance. Spiritual release is the inner refusal to let another entity's malice control your emotional state. It is an act of energetic self-cleansing. Compliance, however, is the act of maintaining proximity to parasites under the religious guise of grace. The demiurge desperately wants you to confuse the two. It wants you to believe that if you do not offer second, third, and infinite chances to oppressive structures or toxic dynamics, you are lacking in divine love. True divine love is not a passive carpet to be walked upon. It is a sword of absolute alignment. Love without boundaries is self-destruction, and self-destruction is an offense against the monad within you. When you identify deliberate deceit, emotional exploitation in a cold marriage, or institutional gaslighting, the sovereign protocol is not a performative display of spiritual forgiveness. The sovereign protocol is uncompromising discernment and total energetic severance. When you stop granting false absolution to those who actively perpetuate matrix inversions, you dismantle their primary leverage. You step out of the endless loops of victimhood and spiritual gaslighting. By honoring the fierce protective clarity of your own divine spark, you refuse to let false doctrines of peace disarm your light, establishing your reality firmly beyond the reach of archontic manipulation. The Architecture of Absolute Discernment, Part 3. Once you have unmasked toxic positivity and neutralized weaponized forgiveness, the archontic system attempts its final, most subtle maneuver: spiritual relativism and the erasure of truth. When oppressors and false teachers realize they can no longer force you into blind compliance or passive absolution, they pivot to convincing you that truth itself is fluid, subjective, and ultimately unknowable. In corporate environments, religious institutions, and modern spiritual circles alike, you will hear the mantra that everyone has their own truth and that taking a definitive stand against systemic evil is merely an egoic obsession with being right. This doctrine of radical relativism is designed to paralyze the sovereign spirit. If no absolute standard of divine order exists, then no corruption can ever be definitively called out, and no boundary can ever be truly justified. The demiurge thrives in this foggy middle ground because an indecisive, doubting soul is incapable of focused action. By convincing the awakened monad that discerning evil from good is an act of spiritual arrogance, the matrix effectively neutralizes your internal compass, rendering you passive once again. Archontic fog, objective inversion equals subjective excuse equals paralysis indecision. Monadic clarity, objective inversion equals absolute truth equals decisive boundary. To dismantle this final barrier, the monad must reclaim the weapon of absolute discernment. True discernment is not hatred, nor is it self-righteous judgment. It is the calm, undeniable perception of cosmic alignment versus synthetic inversion. Just as light is fundamentally different from darkness, authentic divine truth is not open to compromise with parasitic systems. When an authority figure, a partner, or an institution operates on deception, exploitation, or emotional freezing, that behavior is not simply their perspective. It is an active distortion of the pleromic blueprint. Standing in your monadic authority means refusing to let the matrix gaslight your perception. It requires the quiet confidence to say, "This is an inversion, and I will not honor it as truth." When you stop seeking consensus from a sick simulation, you no longer need the permission of oppressors to validate your reality. You trust the deep, unshakable resonance of your sovereign spirit above all external doctrines. By mastering this complete trilogy of liberation, rejecting false positivity, disarming weaponized forgiveness, and cutting through spiritual relativism, you fully reclaim your true identity. You cease to be a puppet manipulated by the clever tactics of the archontic world. You become an unyielding pillar of divine clarity, fully awake to the tricks of the matrix, completely immune to its control scripts, and forever anchored in the uncreated power of the monad.